I'm standing still. My hands are visible. I haven't said anything disrespectful. If you're detaining me, you need to tell me why. I'm not resisting. I'm not moving. I don't consent to searches. If you smell something, you need to explain it.
Step away from the vehicle. Slowly. The man standing beside the open driver's side door doesn't move. He keeps his hands visible, resting lightly on the door frame. I'm standing still, he says. His voice is even, flat. My hands are right here. I said step away from the vehicle, the officer repeats. His tone sharpens, not louder, just narrower. You're being detained. For what reason? The man asks. The officer shifts his weight. The body camera dips, then steadies. I smell narcotics coming from this car. There is a pause, long enough to register. I don't consent to any searches, the man replies, and I haven't been using or transporting drugs. That's not how this works, the officer says. If I say I smell drugs, that gives me probable cause. I understand what probable cause is, the man says calmly. I'm asking you to explain what law you believe I've broken. The officer exhales through his nose. The sound is audible on the mic. You're refusing lawful orders. I'm not refusing, the man says. I'm asking for clarification. Turn around. Hands behind your back. The man doesn't turn. He doesn't raise his voice either. Officer, he says, I'm not resisting. I'm not reaching for anything. I'm simply asking you to slow down and tell me what's happening. The officer's hand moves closer to his holster. You fit the profile, he says. There it is. Unadorned. Unqualified. What profile? The man asks. The kind of person who thinks rules don't apply to him, the officer replies. Out here they do. A car passes behind them. Tires on asphalt. Someone laughs somewhere off camera. Ordinary sounds continuing, indifferent to the moment. I'm going to say this again, the man says. I haven't done anything illegal. I'm asking you to call a supervisor before this escalates. The officer steps closer. The camera angle tightens. This already escalated when you decided to argue, he says. Last chance. Turn around. The man stays exactly where he is. Do you really want this on your body cam? He asks quietly. The officer doesn't answer. The stop began on a wide commercial stretch of road just after midday, the kind designed to move traffic efficiently rather than invite attention. A gas station sat on the corner, its canopy casting a clean rectangle of shade over idling cars. Across the street, a strip mall hummed with routine activity. A dry cleaner, a check-cashing storefront, a pharmacy with automatic doors opening and closing at regular intervals. The sky was clear, the light unremarkable. Nothing about the setting suggested consequence. The officer's patrol car was parked at an angle behind the stopped vehicle, lights off. There had been no siren, no chase, no urgency. The encounter had the quiet confidence of a stop expected to end quickly, procedurally, without complication. The officer stood with his feet planted shoulder-width apart, posture practiced and relaxed, his hands moving with deliberate economy. He spoke the language of routine enforcement, short declarative sentences delivered without visible strain. The driver was a man in his late 30s or early 40s, dressed in casual work clothes that suggested he had places to be afterward. His car was clean, free of clutter, nothing on the seats or floor that drew the eye. The windows were down, the engine off. When he spoke, he did not gesture broadly or interrupt. He waited for the officer to finish, then responded in measured phrases, as if aware that precision mattered more than speed. The initial reason given for the stop was vague but not unusual, a minor traffic observation that required no citation. The officer asked for license and registration. The man provided both immediately. No fumbling, no protest. The exchange could have ended there, and for a moment it seemed like it might. Instead, the officer lingered. He took an extra step toward the open window. He tilted his head slightly, as though noticing something only he could perceive. His gaze moved slowly over the interior of the car, then back to the driver's face. The body camera captured the shift. A pause where none was necessary, a recalibration. I'm detecting an odor, the officer said. An odor of what? The man asked. Narcotics, the officer replied, as if naming a color. The word hung in the air, unsupported by anything visible. There was no paraphernalia, no smoke, no residue. The officer did not point to a source or describe the smell. He did not need to. His authority supplied the rest. The man did not react with surprise or indignation. He nodded once, slowly. I don't have any drugs in the vehicle, he said. And I don't consent to a search. That was when the balance shifted. The officer's confidence did not disappear, but it changed shape. His voice became firmer, his phrasing more rigid. He began to repeat himself, not louder, just more often. Each repetition carried the implication that compliance was no longer optional, that patience had an expiration date. The man remained steady. He stood where he had been instructed to stand, his movements minimal. He addressed the officer as Sir. He asked questions rather than making statements. He framed each response as cooperation, even when declining consent. There was no attempt to dominate the exchange, only to slow it down. Traffic continued to pass. A woman fueling her car glanced over briefly, then looked away. A delivery truck idled at the light. The world did not stop for this interaction, and that normalcy gave the officer room to press forward without witnesses yet paying close attention. From the outside, it looked like a standard stop extending a few minutes longer than usual. Inside the exchange, something else was taking shape. Procedure was no longer guiding the encounter. It was being used. Neither man raised his voice. Neither moved abruptly. But the space between them narrowed, not in distance, but in options. And in that narrowing space, the officer began to act as though the outcome was already decided. Even as the man continued to behave as though reason and process still mattered, the officer told him to step away from the vehicle again. The wording was identical to before, but the timing was different. Came faster, with less space afterward. The implication was clear. The conversation was no longer moving forward. It was circling. I'm already outside the vehicle, the man said. I'm standing where you asked me to stand. Further back, the officer replied. By the curb. The man looked down briefly, as if measuring the distance, then took 2 slow steps backward. He stopped when his heels reached the edge of the concrete. Is this acceptable? He asked. For now, the officer said. He lifted his radio, then lowered it without speaking. The motion felt intentional, a reminder that escalation was always one button away. The officer asked again about drugs. Not in the form of a question, but a statement phrased as confirmation. The man answered again exactly as before. No drugs. No consent to search. His tone did not change. His posture remained open. His hands stayed visible. The officer shifted tactics. He began explaining consequences. If you keep refusing, he said, this is going to turn into something bigger than it needs to be. I'm not refusing lawful orders, the man replied. I'm exercising my rights calmly. The officer smiled briefly, without warmth. Rights don't mean what you think they mean out here. He stepped closer. Not aggressively, but close enough that the body camera captured more of the man's chest than his face. The lens distorted the space, making the officer feel larger, the man smaller. Last chance, the officer said. The man inhaled, then exhaled. Slowly. I'm asking you to call a supervisor, he said. This doesn't need to continue like this. The officer ignored the request. He asked the man where he was coming from, then where he was going, then why he was in the area. Each question overlapped the last, never fully answered before the next arrived. The man responded anyway, concise and consistent. His answers did not contradict each other. They did not expand. The officer circled the car once, narrating his movements aloud for the camera. He commented on the cleanliness, the lack of personal items, the absence of anything obvious. Each observation was framed as suspicious rather than reassuring. Too clean, he muttered. The man said nothing. A second patrol car passed slowly, then continued down the road. No stop, no assistance. The officer did not call it in. The smell of gasoline drifted from the station nearby. Cars pulled in and out. A man pumping fuel paused to watch for a moment, then resumed. Another customer glanced over, curiosity flickering briefly before routine reclaimed their attention. The officer returned to the man and repeated the order to turn around and place his hands behind his back. "I'm not resisting," the man said, "but I don't understand why you're escalating this." "Because you won't comply," the officer replied. "I am complying," the man said. "I just don't consent." The distinction hung there, unresolved. The officer's voice dropped slightly, becoming more controlled, more deliberate. "You're being detained for investigation," he said. "At this point, it's not a discussion." "Am I under arrest?" the man asked. "Not yet," the officer said. "That depends on how you act." The man nodded once. "Then I'll continue acting calmly." Minutes passed like this. Instructions repeated. Clarifications requested. Each cycle ended exactly where it began. The officer grew more rigid. His sentences shortened. His patience thinned, not explosively, but through compression, as if pressure were building inside a sealed container. He accused the man of being evasive, of using legal language to confuse the situation, of thinking he was smarter than the system. None of the accusations landed visibly. The man did not defend himself against them. He did not counterattack. He simply returned to the same statements spoken with the same cadence. "I haven't done anything illegal. I'm asking for a supervisor. I don't consent to searches." The officer began narrating for the camera again, framing the man's calmness as defiance. "Subject is refusing commands," he said. "Subject is argumentative." The words did not match the tone of the scene, but they were recorded anyway. Another car slowed as it passed. A woman inside looked directly at them this time. She did not look away immediately. The officer noticed. His shoulders squared slightly. His voice rose just enough to be heard beyond the immediate space. "Sir, stop resisting." "I'm not resisting," the man said. "I haven't moved." The officer gestured with his hand, palm down, as if pressing the air. "You're not cooperating." "I am," the man replied. "I'm just not agreeing." The officer took a step back and reached for his radio. He keyed it, then hesitated again. He seemed to reconsider, then lowered it without speaking. The delay was subtle but meaningful. Calling for backup would introduce witnesses he did not control. Instead, he changed approach again. "You smell like drugs," he said flatly. The man tilted his head slightly. "I don't use drugs," he said, "and I don't have any on me. That's not what my nose says." "Your nose isn't evidence," the man replied quietly. The officer stiffened. "Careful." "I'm being careful," the man said. "That's the point." The officer ordered him to spread his feet, then corrected the spacing, then ordered him to adjust his stance again. Each correction was minor, but the cumulative effect was destabilizing, forcing the man to constantly recalibrate without ever satisfying the requirement. A third person approached the scene, this one more openly curious. He stood near the edge of the gas station lot, phone in hand. Not recording yet, but ready. The officer noticed him. His jaw tightened. He positioned himself slightly between the man and the growing audience. "This would all be over if you just did what you were told," the officer said. "It would only be over for you," the man replied. "Not for me." The officer laughed once, sharply. "You think this is about me?" "I think it stopped being about procedure a while ago," the man said. The officer's eyes flicked to the camera, then back. "You're close to being arrested." "For what charge?" the man asked. "Obstruction," the officer said. "I haven't obstructed anything," the man replied. "That's not for you to decide." Silence followed. Longer this time. The officer said nothing. The man said nothing. The sounds of traffic filled the gap. A horn honked in the distance. The man at the gas station lifted his phone and began recording. The officer finally spoke. "Turn around," he said again. The man did not move immediately, not in refusal but in deliberation. He looked straight ahead, then slightly to the side, acknowledging the presence of witnesses without engaging them. "I'm asking one more time for a supervisor," he said. The officer's voice hardened. "That's not happening." "Then I'll remain where I am," the man said. Calm, non-threatening, visible. The officer stepped forward, closing the distance entirely now. The body camera captured the man's breath, steady and controlled. "This is your last warning," the officer said. The man met his gaze. "I hear you." Nothing changed, and that, more than anything else, seemed to unsettle the officer. The man spoke without raising his voice, without shifting his stance. "Officer," he said, "before this goes any further, you should know who you're dealing with." The officer let out a short breath, half a laugh. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with." "I don't think you do," the man replied. He reached slowly into his pocket, pausing halfway. "May I retrieve my identification?" The officer's hand hovered near his holster. Slowly, the man complied. He removed a wallet, opened it, and held it out at arm's length. Not thrust forward, not withheld, just there. "I'm a federal agent," the man said. "Drug Enforcement Administration." The words were delivered the same way everything else had been delivered. Calm, unadorned, no emphasis. The officer stared at the wallet without taking it. The body camera captured the momentary stillness, the recalculation. "That's funny," the officer said, "because you don't look like it." "I'm not asking you to believe me," the man replied. "I'm asking you to verify it." The officer finally took the wallet, glanced at the credential, then handed it back almost immediately, as if the contact itself were distasteful. "Anyone can buy a badge," he said. "Anyone can print a card. It has a number," the man said, "and a field office listed." The officer shook his head. "Nice try. I'm offering you a way to slow this down," the man continued. "You can call it in. You can confirm my status. We can both move on." The officer's jaw tightened. His confidence returned quickly, sharper now, edged with irritation. "You're not special," he said. "Federal, state, civilian, it doesn't matter. Out here, I run the stop." "I'm not claiming to be special," the man said. "I'm explaining why this situation doesn't make sense." "It makes perfect sense," the officer replied. "You smell like drugs. You're being uncooperative. And now you're lying." "I'm not lying," the man said. The officer handed the wallet back abruptly. "You're making this worse for yourself." The man nodded once. "That's your interpretation." The officer stepped away and turned slightly, as if to collect himself. The witnesses watched closely now. Phones were up. The space felt tighter, louder without anyone speaking. The reveal did not end the conflict. It deepened it. The officer finally keyed his radio. His voice, when he spoke into it, was clipped and deliberately casual, as if the last several minutes had not happened. He requested a supervisor, framing the call as routine, nothing more than a verification delay caused by a non-compliant subject. He did not mention the badge. He did not mention the accusation of being a federal agent. While they waited, he positioned the man slightly off to the side, not restrained, but not free to leave either. The command was subtle, a shift of stance and a pointed gesture rather than a verbal order. The man complied without comment. His calm, unchanged since the beginning, now stood in contrast to the officer's movements, which had become more precise, more guarded. A second patrol car arrived within minutes and parked behind the first. The supervisor stepped out slowly, taking in the scene before saying a word. His eyes moved from the officer to the man, to the cluster of bystanders with phones raised. He did not rush. "What's going on?" the supervisor asked. The officer spoke first. He summarized quickly, emphasizing the claimed odor, the refusal to consent, the supposed resistance. He described the identification as suspicious. He spoke in the language of reports, not conversation. The supervisor turned to the man. "Sir." The man answered the same way he had answered every question that day. Calm, direct. He stated his name, He stated that he had been stopped without citation. He stated that he had been accused of possessing drugs without evidence. He stated that he had identified himself as a federal agent and requested verification. The supervisor's expression did not change, but his posture did. He asked to see the credential. This time, when the man handed it over, it was examined carefully. The supervisor turned it over, checked the number, read the field office designation. He stepped a few feet away and made a call. The officer stood silently now. The radio chatter from the supervisor's phone was not audible, but the waiting was. Seconds stretched. The bystanders did not leave. No one spoke. When the supervisor returned, he did not raise his voice. He did not confront the officer. He simply said, "He's verified." The words landed with quiet finality. The officer's shoulders dropped slightly, not in relief but in recognition. His authority, so confidently exercised moments earlier, had nowhere left to stand. The supervisor turned to the man. "You're free to go," he said. "I apologize for the delay." The man nodded. "Thank you." There was no celebration, no vindication. The exchange ended the way it should have ended long before. The supervisor then turned back to the officer. His voice lowered. His words were procedural. "Turn in your body cam footage," he said. "We'll talk back at the station." The officer nodded. He did not argue. He did not explain. The humiliation was not public confrontation, but public awareness. Phones remained raised. The silence felt heavier than shouting would have. As the man returned to his vehicle and drove away, the officer stayed where he was, waiting for instructions that no longer came from him. The consequences did not arrive all at once. They unfolded the way institutions prefer them to unfold. Quietly, internally, documented in memos rather than headlines. Within hours of the stop, the body camera footage was logged, flagged, and preserved. Not because of public pressure, but because a supervisor had ordered it. That single instruction triggered a sequence the officer could no longer influence. Internal Affairs was notified before the shift ended. The incident report, drafted by the officer himself, became the first piece of evidence reviewed. Its language was precise. Its omissions were noticeable. The next morning, the officer was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The notice cited standard policy: use of discretion, escalation without articulable cause, and failure to follow supervisory directives. His badge and service weapon were surrendered temporarily. He was instructed not to discuss the incident with colleagues. The investigation moved faster than most. Federal involvement has a way of narrowing timelines. The DEA agent submitted a formal complaint, attaching the verified credential number, timestamps, and the names of responding supervisors. The body cam footage was requested formally, not as evidence of a crime, but as documentation of conduct. Review panels noted the repeated claim of smelling narcotics without corroboration. They noted the refusal to call a supervisor when requested. They noted the language used to characterize calm behavior as resistance. Each note was small on its own. Together, they formed a pattern that could not be explained away. 37 days after the stop, the officer was terminated. The termination letter cited violations of departmental policy on unlawful detention, false articulation of probable cause, and conduct unbecoming an officer. It made no reference to intent. It did not accuse. It simply documented actions and outcomes. Civil proceedings followed. The city settled the lawsuit filed by the DEA agent for unlawful detention and civil rights violations for $425,000. The settlement included no admission of wrongdoing, only acknowledgement of harm. Legal fees were covered separately, totaling $118,600. The city's insurer required policy revisions as a condition of continued coverage. The officer did not face criminal charges. Instead, his name was added to a Brady disclosure list, requiring prosecutors to disclose his history in any case where he might testify. That designation effectively ended his ability to work in law enforcement. His certification was suspended, then revoked, after a state review board found the department's conclusions supported by evidence. The department issued a statement weeks later. It was brief. It referenced commitment to community trust, adherence to standards, and ongoing training initiatives. No names were mentioned. For the officer, the career ended not with sirens or courtrooms, but with paperwork. Forms signed, access revoked, doors closed quietly. For the system, the outcome was framed as corrective. For everyone else, it was simply documented. What followed made it clear that the incident had not been an anomaly. It had merely been visible. Internal Affairs expanded its review beyond the single stop once the termination was finalized. The officer's personnel file, previously unremarkable on the surface, revealed a series of complaints that had been logged, acknowledged, and then quietly closed. None had resulted in formal discipline. Each had been categorized as unsubstantiated, lacking corroboration, or resolved through counseling. The details were consistent. Drivers stopped without citation. Vague articulations of suspicion. Repeated reliance on odor as probable cause without supporting evidence. Requests for supervisors that went unanswered. Each report, taken alone, appeared inconclusive. Together, they described a pattern of enforcement that leaned heavily on discretion and rarely faced challenge. Statistical analysis conducted during the review showed that the officer conducted vehicle stops at nearly twice the departmental average. Of those stops, a disproportionate number involved searches that produced no contraband. The justification recorded most often was sensory detection. Smell, perception, experience. Demographic data, included as an appendix rather than a headline, showed further imbalance. Complaints were concentrated among drivers from the same neighborhoods. Internal memos had flagged the trend years earlier, recommending additional training and monitoring. Those recommendations were acknowledged in writing and then deferred. The department's early warning system, designed to identify risk patterns, had generated alerts more than once. Each alert required supervisory review. Each review concluded with a note indicating no further action necessary. There was no evidence of malice in the paperwork. Only acceptance. The stop involving a federal agent disrupted that equilibrium not because it was different in nature, but because it was different in consequence. Verification introduced an external record. Body camera footage was reviewed by people who did not work down the hall. Discretion encountered documentation. Policy analysts later noted that the same conduct, applied to someone without institutional leverage, would likely have ended with a search, possibly an arrest, and no follow-up review. The system was not designed to self-correct unless compelled. Training protocols were updated after the case closed. Supervisors were reminded, in writing, of their obligation to respond to requests. The changes were framed as improvements, not corrections. Nothing in the review suggested the officer believed he was acting outside the rules. The rules had simply been interpreted generously, until they could not be anymore. The outcome of this encounter was never decided in the moment it was filmed. It was decided much earlier, in smaller moments that never drew attention. In stops that ended without complaints. In reports that used familiar language to justify familiar conclusions. In reviews that accepted explanation as resolution. What happened on that roadside followed the same path until it didn't. Not because the behavior changed, but because the subject of it did. The man remained calm because calm was all that was required of him. He spoke carefully because he understood that documentation, not reaction, determines outcomes. He asked for procedure because procedure is where power is supposed to end. Nothing about his behavior forced accountability. It simply made it unavoidable once verification entered the picture. The officer did not collapse under confrontation. He collapsed under record, under time-stamped footage, under policies that could no longer be interpreted loosely once another agency was watching. There was no dramatic reckoning because systems rarely fail dramatically. They fail quietly when their assumptions are exposed. This was not a story about a bad decision in the field. It was a story about unchecked confidence reinforced by routine. About authority exercised so often without consequence that it begins to feel self-justifying. About how discretion, when unexamined, becomes entitlement. The system responded the way systems do when forced to acknowledge themselves. with reviews, with memos, with settlements that balance ledgers rather than restore trust. The language remained careful. The tone remained neutral. Accountability arrived without apology. If this could happen to someone trained to navigate the system, someone who knew exactly how to speak, when to pause, and which words to choose, then the question answers itself. Not everyone gets verification. Not everyone gets a supervisor. Not everyone leaves with documentation instead of charges. Justice here was not swift, and it was not generous. It was procedural, and that is precisely the point. Unchecked power does not announce its limits. It meets them only when it is recorded.